Chariots of the Gods by Erich Von Daniken. This may not have been the book that started the movement, or the documentary that was to follow, which I didn't see until this decade, but for many it did. And there are some things in books like this that are going to sound racist. They're going to sound insulting to our ancestors, which were probably stronger, bigger at times, more intelligent, more patient, more pious, that sort of thing. One is going to see certain things related to how over the course of 20-some books or something like this that Erich Von Daniken has written, and I would read them all and do a little program on each of them if I had them. Well, the next one, some of them have multiple titles, so that's not what I'm talking about. But the psychological and spiritual experiences that people have, this is kind of denied by the ancient alien theorists. If we spend millions of dollars on certain houses of worship, and as much as $1 million hours to pay for these things, and then for them to be worked or something like that, why can't we say that our ancestors likewise did such a thing, particularly when spirituality has become less and less important for the human being? Now, there are some very interesting things that are brought up in these books that, in an archaeological sense, they may not be seen elsewhere. Now, I did talk about the Mayan year, and, well, the Mayan, Aztecs, and that sort of thing. It wasn't till after I saw the documentary with that illustration there, the guy in his, I guess he looks like an angel or something, but you look at some of the costumes that are still used natively. And for Ghana, is that somewhere that's cold out in Uzbekistan? I myself bundle up quite a bit instead of, turning the heat to 70 degrees or something like that come wintertime. And my shoe has squeaked upon me. So to protect from the heat and the cold, to have certain symbolic ways, human beings have been documented as being as tall as 14 feet, and some are, full-grown human beings less than 3 feet tall even. So, some of the things that are shown there, and some of the details in terms of, you have, you're not dealing with a physical being, because hanging out of ships and all that sort of thing, or perhaps legend. And if legend is exaggerating some of these claims to such a point, how do we even know that it wasn't like some of what happened with my Celtic ancestors? And this is what I mean by the whole racist thing and the ancient alien thing. Because if the Europeans figured it out centuries, or thousands of years, or tens or even hundreds of thousands of years later, or maybe we haven't figured it out today, some of the technologies being used in ancient America and Africa and such, the brown-skinned people, is how, these people may be thinking. It's like, because they using the word primitive and all that sort of stuff, or negrescence, and, physical features looking more and more negroid or Asiatic. But in terms of culture, particularly since, this book was written around the time that in America, 1967 was the Civil Rights Act. And since then, there hasn't been allowed to be policies. Apparently, there can be policies against the male and against the white, but there hasn't been supposedly allowed policies of discrimination based on beliefs or desires, or I think a cat is getting a mouse under a bush, which is what it should do. So I'm rambling on a bit here, so let me get into some questions, because one thing that has came up repeatedly on movies and science in general is in terms of the theory of relativity that your relative lifespan, the faster and faster you're traveling, but there's units of travel that possibly make it such a thing that, say, the universe is bigger than 21 billion light years across. Say it's twice that big. We can still possibly at some point get to the point where humans or some other creature could travel across the galaxy. Not the galaxy, what am I saying? But they could possibly travel way back, clear across from one end to the other in a lifetime. But then the age of the universe would be gone in that way of saying, but their relative lifespan. So some of that could be going on. Now, I do not think that it's necessary to say that physical aliens have came here and interacted with us and propelled human development and all sorts of things. Since this book has been released, I think it's not only been, when I went to high school and college, the idea was that in college, the idea of human beings, their age, went from 1 million and some years old to over 7 million years ago. And it's been taken back even further into the Himalayas, not even Africa this time. And these people worked metal. They weren't as tall. They were mountain people, I guess. But so the human being has powers of observation that occurs over time. The Piri-Reis maps and stuff like this could show technologically enhanced variation. Now, that's what I mean, astral travel. A person, you have experiences going, I didn't know about the down part, but when I first read this book, this is maybe the third time I've read this book. I read it in middle school or high school, and then I read it when I bought it a decade or so ago, and then I've picked it up to read it again to talk about it. Astral projection is real. I've experienced it. I've experienced a lot of the sensual and psychological highs that could explain a lot of these things. But, okay, they figured out how under the soil. But there are things that, whether straight up mystical experience, autism, or whatever, that a person can sense things that they wouldn't be able to ordinarily sense. And maybe they can't predictably do that, but maybe they could map the Earth under the ice. Or perhaps, just like some legends of what happened in India, that before we had anatomically modern human, the other types of humans, which again, we don't have to say that this is experiments from aliens, or maybe that, God didn't put the souls in the others and just decided, okay, all these other creatures are popping up, we're going to give the Homo sapiens sapien the soul or something. No, I don't think how it worked that way. It doesn't seem to be how it worked that way. I do believe there are spiritual beings that interact with us, though. But the Nazca lines is another important thing that a person should probably look at. And the Nazca lines, I had an interesting Grimorium Verum-like dream that reminds me of the Nazca lines, but that's for another point. But we do find that it was part of festivals. We saw the destructive potlatch and other sorts of evidence, other sort of ceremonies that would be evidence around some of the lines. Some stuff was done over old lines for a long time, but there are different periods of when the lines were formed. Now, some of it lines up with the stars, some of it lines up with waterways, underground pipeways that are, again, there's some interesting stuff our ancestors figured out how to do. The Sacsayhuaman monuments of the stones, but they had a tradition about acids and stuff like this, and this is obviously, it's not a spaceship. That Copan illustration, particularly when you see more of it, it's apparent it's plants and it's the underworld, and if you can read it, it's talking about that. Archaeoastronomy, just like as my point with Samhain, Samhain, as some people will mispronounce it, is that we have stuff going on. And you have evidence in old records and archaeological evidence that points towards this, that, and the other. So human culture has gone back very, very far, and some of the observations, a little bit was known by one generation, a little bit was known by another generation, and honestly, if over 72 years you see the stars kind of shift 1 degree, that's sort of some of the information you're going to see is derivative. If you see 1 degree of notice, and if, okay, 1/366, supposedly if you go like this, circle around, you're going to have 366, which is a interesting thing. You have batteries, you have electric plating and stuff like this. Since World War II, the government of my country and other governments have been developing technology very quickly. And they will keep things secret for a long, long time. Now, there are things that have happened, I guess some of that's not here, but the odds of us being the only intelligent thing out in the cosmos is very slim. There's certainly apparently there's bacteria outside the Earth sphere. The odds of, we find more and more and more and more planets and such that could produce human Earth-like situations. But let's not pretend that it's even limited to carbon-based life form here. And some of the things that happen on this planet, in terms of excess of moisture in a critter, a lacking of moisture in a critter, the extreme hots and colds that can be experienced in this life. We see, we theorize possible things about mummification and stuff like this that we could have witnessed about other creatures. Perhaps people want to be frozen, to be, so their cause of death can be undone at a later time. And obviously there's problems with the Bible, so this is sort of a period that, to maintain a faith in God, they're interpreting creatively in the terms of science and that sort of thing. But what does it mean when we say gods? What does that really mean? What do these, fire beings, and other creatures, how do they interact with us? Do we need to invoke them or evoke them? Are they there anyways? What do they want from us? What is the difference between imagination? Can you fake it till you make it? Are there other creatures out there trying to make the same? Oh, Peru reminds me of... Yeah, Peru and Egypt kind of... You know, what are some of the artifacts... I mean, how do we differentiate between science and philosophy of science? That's probably the most important. But I went into the general age of, oh yeah, the robot thing, when we're gonna have artificial intelligence, and you know, what is the strength of tradition? You have stuff like the mention of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, is 2/3 so-called divinity and 1/3 human. Well, okay, the odd powers of 2, if you add 1, are multiples of 3, so therefore none of those are perfectly divisible by 3. But what, you go back 54, 54 generations ago, you can actually have an exact number. But there's figures of speech, and there's different ways of saying things that, like in the Bible, if you look at if you know Hebrew very well, you're going to have a different experience than if you know Aramaic, the actual language of the entirety of Tanakh in all its versions. Now, there are different dialects and that sort of thing, but okay. There's materials. I said there's technology that maybe we haven't figured out, that they figured out, and the human being tries and fails and succeeds in various different ways. But rather than just saying, oh, ancient aliens, or modern abduction experiences. Oh yeah, if you're abducted, X for the aliens with the small hands. But rather than just some cosmological statement, what do they do for our lives? How does this stuff work socially? How spiritually and psychologically do we form relationships? So, and the whole aliens did aliens. Well, what about those who did the aliens? So it's detaching the religious argument, but using the same sort of thing that people with failed logic in terms of religion will say. And when it comes to religion, saying that a material... Okay, I shouldn't have my knee a bit like that. So the material culture. If we look at the material culture that supports some of the claims of the faith, now we can say if it has nothing cosmologically that can't be said literally true, like personally my approach to religion is that doesn't mean that the rest of it is proven. Just because science hasn't disproved doesn't mean that it has proved it either. So there is the aspect of faith. There is the aspect of knowledge. And some knowledge is for you. And hopefully that's what my channel will help with, is the personal knowledge of the human being.